took over. Baker didn't want to be the new campaign chairman. The election didn't go right. Perot took 19 million votes out of that election. And unbeknown, and a total amazement to President Bush, he was defeated. Then Bill Clinton came over, took over, still to our amazement to this day. The Oslo Accords of 1993, the Jordanian-Israeli Peace Treaty of 1994, the White Plantation Agreement of 1998, but all his scandals, Whitewater, Lewinsky, the Chinese espionage scandal that he had broke on May 1st, 1998. At the time, he and Gore and Albright were putting the big squeeze on Netanyahu to give more land up. Big pressure. So for 12 days, we had the pressure from the White House on Netanyahu and 12 days of Chinese espionage articles, back to back on the front page of many newspapers around the United States. Love that picture. Clinton's attempt to achieve legacy of Mideast peace, his final effort was in July of 2000 when Barack offered 95% of Judea and Samaria. He offered to negotiate the future of Jerusalem, but Arafat turned the deal down according to his interview with Christiane Amanpour and CNN because he wanted control of the holy sites in Jerusalem. George W. Bush. See, President Bush wanted to be a facilitator, not an active participant in the Land for Peace process. That was his plan, because he'd seen his father and Bill Clinton expend all this political capital. I mean, Bill Clinton's most frequent visitor to the White House was Yasser Arafat during his 8 years in office. And he saw this, and he didn't want to be a facilitator. And I can tell you, his first 75 days in office could not have gone smoother. He had control of the House, control of the Senate, his Republican Party did. Sally Quinn of the Washington Post, left-leaning newspaper, stated Bush has the best cabinet in 100 years. And that's quite a compliment. He wanted to be the education president, a kinder, gentler Washington, D.C., like he had been so effective in Austin, Texas. He had big plans. Things were going well for him. And then Mubarak and Abdullah came to town. See, things were spinning out of control in Israel because Israel was responding to the terror. When things spin out of control in the Middle East, it's because Israel is saying enough is enough, and they aggressively go after the terrorist organizations. So Mubarak came in on May 31st, the day he lands at Camp David. A Chinese fighter jet bumps into the back of one of our reconnaissance planes, sends it to an emergency landing. And for the next 10 days, President Bush had his first crises, international crises. What was interesting, a couple weeks before that, Sharon had been at the White House and had been on Capitol Hill and had been at the Pentagon, and for 4 days, Sharon was in the news in Washington. But Mubarak shows up, and all of a sudden, the front page news is President Bush's first international crisis with China. Then King Abdullah came to the White House on April 10th after meeting with Christian leaders, after being on Capitol Hill, trying to persuade President Bush to get involved in the process. He left the evening of April 10th, and the next day, our problem with China was over. We got our troops back. Still had some additional follow-up, but for the most part, it was off the front page of the papers. But the event that affected every one of us in this room, and that will the rest of our lives, happened on 9/11/2001. 17 days prior to 9/11, President Bush, Crown Prince Abdullah from Saudi Arabia, Colin Powell, Daniel Kirchner, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, and Prince Bandar were negotiating what was going to be the most comprehensive address ever given by an American president to the UN General Assembly. President Bush was going to call on Israel to fulfill the UN resolutions 242 and 338, giving it back this land. They were going to call about the future status of Jerusalem, and President Bush was going to go where his father or Bill Clinton would never dare go, and he was going to call for a Palestinian state. 9/10, Bandar said, we have just finished this comprehensive round-the-clock effort. This was a payback to Abdullah, who thought he was siding, President Bush was siding with the Israelis. You could tell there were some things going on in the White House based on things that Bush was saying over that period of time. But 9/10, Bandar said he is taking 9/11 off because for all practical purposes, they were finished with the address that President Bush or Powell were going to give to the UN on 9/24. 9/11 happened. Bandar said it was the worst possible day ever for Islam. It was the worst possible day ever for Saudi Arabia because 15 and 19 of those terrorists were Saudis. See, what happened is the God of Israel did not produce the evil of 9/11, but the God of Israel did not stop it or restrain it from happening as he had so many other times. And we haven't had another major or even a small terror event on our shores since 9/11. But that day we crossed the line. That day our country crossed the line. That day the nations of the world were now going to experience what Israel was going to experience. Israel has a problem with radical Islam. Now the U.S. and the world has a problem with radical Islam. Israel has a security fence, and the United States right now is consulting with Israel on their security fence about the one we're going to be putting on our border. The parallels continue over and over again. But Israel's problems today are our problems as well. The consequence. 9/11 has cost us, as I mentioned earlier, $500 billion. It has cost our economy over $1 trillion. It's produced the Patriot Act, an act that would have got any other president impeached. We have seen our individual freedoms squandered, diminished, and changed. We see 85-year-old women and 3-year-old kids getting frisked and checked over at the airport security lines. We can't profile, but it's changed our life as we know it. You want to open up a new checking account, they want to know everything about you. It's an overreaction. You also can see how the mark of the beast is going to move in through peace and security and safety. You can see it. The mark is going to just come together. It won't be forced on us, conceptually forced onto us when we have to take it in order to be fed. But it's coming. The technology is coming. We've got implants now called the Digital Angel and other ones that are being worked on right now. We have a digital wallet in Japan where you use your cell phone as your everything. It's your wallet. Everything that you have in a wallet you can now have in your cell phone. It's coming. But 9/11 changed our lives as we know it. And now President Bush has made a personal commitment to Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security. This is his commitment. Finally, President Bush got his message out on June 24th of 2002. That plan was merged into the Quartet Roadmap that summer, and it was officially endorsed on December 20th, 2002. The UN, the U.S., Russia, and the EU met at the Oval Office December 20th, 2002 to confirm and affirm the Quartet Roadmap. Israel had nobody there. This is what the nation's plan was for the nations of Israel. Matter of fact, that very same day, the UPI had an article entitled, "The World Powers Have Submitted Their Plan to Israel." And as we know, every world power that's controlled the land of Israel has become a former world power, and the British have diminished much in their power. But the Quartet Peace Plan was finally delivered on April 30th, 2003. This is, as I mentioned, the United States, the EU, the UN, and Russia's way for Israel to divide their land. The roadmap had a two-state solution, and it had 3 different phases. It hasn't even got to phase 1 yet because of the Palestinians. Unbeknown to the nations and their political leaders, they are on a collision course with the God of Israel over his covenant land. What also happened that first week of May, beginning on May 1st, right after the roadmap was delivered, the United States, who usually, they had a record in June 1992, the United States had 399 tornadoes in 1 month. Immediately after the roadmap was delivered, Colin Powell's May 3rd meeting with Assad in Syria, calling on Israel to leave the Golan Heights. The May 4th meeting where William Burns of the State Department blames Christian fundamentalists for the reason there isn't peace in Israel. And President Bush stating on May 9th to a University of South Carolina commencement address, his commitment to Israel dividing their land and 2 states living side by side in peace and security. And Colin Powell going back to Israel on May 10th and May 11th, and then going over and seeing King Abdullah in Jordan on May 12th. we had 434 tornadoes in that 10-day period. We've never had anything like it. We did a